That was by far the scariest moment I've ever had in my entire life. Hey, my name's Devin, and if you like aviation content, smash that like button and let's get into it. This is gonna be a story time about the scariest moments I've ever had in a helicopter. I've had two of them and they're actually extremely similar, and we're gonna talk about them right now. The first one I ever had was on my first night flight ever. This was during my private rating, and during your private, I think you need 3 or 5 hours of nighttime, and you need a night cross country. So I was out in Hawaii and we were doing our night cross country. I was with my instructor. So on our first leg, it was pretty non-eventful. It was a relatively windy night. I don't exactly remember, but there may have been an AirMet Tango out, and what that AirMet Tango is it's for moderate turbulence. And I've been on commercial jets and we've had turbulence, and that one doesn't really bother me. And prior to this experience, I had a little bit of turbulence experience, so I wasn't too concerned about it. I didn't think much of it. So on that first leg, it was pretty non-eventful. On the second leg, we were getting bumped around, but it wasn't too bad. But then on the third leg, when we were returning back towards our home airport, we got caught in some crazy turbulence. And there's a couple different classifications of turbulence, but for me, I would say this was like pretty moderate. I'm not sure it was severe. We didn't lose total control of the aircraft, but it was pretty moderate and really sketchy. So as we were flying along, we got caught in an updraft, and an updraft is not too scary. It's just a parcel of air that's just moving upwards. So we were in this updraft and it was kind of bumping us around, and then all of a sudden the updraft stopped and we dropped through the updraft. And that period of going from the updraft to the downdraft, we got a little bit of a low G feeling, and it was a pretty violent transition. You can imagine this upward feeling dropping into this downward feeling, and we still maintained control of the aircraft. However, my VSI was initially in a climb and then instantly it drops, and I look over to my instructor and I'm like, what the? It just happened, and what do we do? And I would honestly say I was panicking and I was freaking out. I didn't necessarily think the helicopter was gonna come apart, but that was in the back of my mind, like, oh, is this what's gonna kill us? Is this what's gonna break the rotor system? That's not really a possibility in this situation. But I looked to my instructor and I'm like, what do we need to do? This is so scary. And he looked at me and he said, just ride the wave. And that's true. That's what I teach my students too. In turbulence, the procedure is to slow down and just maintain control of the aircraft as best you can. Don't fight the aircraft, kind of just let it do whatever it needs to do. But you kind of just have to sit there and ride the wave. It's gonna pick you up, it may roll you, it may change your pitch, but you kind of just have to sit there and take it. You just sit there and accept it for what it is. The second scariest moment I've ever had in a helicopter was also at night. So there seems to be this theme of all my crazy things happen at night, but on this situation, I was actually in the 44, which is the 4-door helicopter, versus the 22, which is the 2-door helicopter. So it was one of my first flights in the 44, and I was doing it under IFR. So what this means in the helicopter is we were actually operating in clear conditions, but I had these special glasses on which limit my view of outside the helicopter, so you can only lock in on the instruments. And we were doing instrument training, so I was looking at the instruments. We departed the airport and it was maybe 8 or 9 o'clock at night, so obviously quite dark, and I'm not under those glasses yet. So we're flying along, and then my instructor's like, all right, put the glasses on. So I look down, I put the glasses on, and the second I come back and I try to look at the instruments, I get spatial disorientation. If you're not familiar with spatial disorientation, it is when you lose awareness of your body's position in space. So you may be straight and level, but you could feel like you're in a dive, or you're in a roll, or you're pitching up, or you're pitching down, or the helicopter is doing that. And you may make the control inputs to counteract that feeling, even though the helicopter is level. And spatial disorientation is one of the scariest things that can happen in aircraft. Both fixed wing and helicopters, it's one of the #1 causes. It happens a lot when you go into the clouds and you lose your outside reference and you lose your orientation in space to what the aircraft and what your body is doing. As soon as I look back up to look at the instruments, I lose spatial awareness. I had this panicking moment, and I don't really suffer from anxiety or panic attacks, but in that moment I felt panic, and I felt like this overwhelming feeling of death come over me, like I am about to die, and it was absolutely terrifying. My instructor still had the controls at this point, which is good because I don't know what I would have done. Throughout the whole process, I didn't say anything. I'm just sitting there in my seat freaking out and so overwhelmed with what is happening. And maybe 2 or 3 seconds later, it was all over and I had gained spatial awareness when I looked at the instruments, and I really felt that we were fine, and my instructor wasn't obviously freaking out. The helicopter was not in an unsafe position. But there's this thing called time dilation. So even though it was maybe 2, 3, 4 seconds of panic for me, in that moment, it felt like an eternity. I felt like I was sitting there watching myself die because the helicopter was out of control and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what to do. But it was only a couple seconds where I was just unaware, and the rest of the flight I was paranoid. And that situation taught me a great lesson, and it is the importance of flying in clear conditions and not losing your spatial awareness or your situational awareness. The moment that you lose orientation of the helicopter and of your position in space, all bets are off. And even if you are an instrument rated pilot and you have instruments to tell you the attitude of the aircraft, it is very difficult to look at those, be aware, cool, calm, and collected enough to gather and figure out what you need to do. And that's why I think flying into clouds is the most dangerous thing that you can do as a pilot. The other thing is spatial disorientation can happen in visual conditions, even if you're not under the glasses or something. Another time that it happened where we were in clear conditions, no problems at all, the weather was great, was I was looking down at, maybe I was messing with the iPad or the GPS or something, and I was really locked in for maybe 30 seconds working on something. The second I pulled my head up, my student was actually in a turn at this moment, and previously we had been straight and level. So we went from being straight and level, to take my head up, and we're in a bank and I lost spatial awareness. And this was almost even scarier because I'm the instructor, I'm the one that's supposed to be in control, and I thought that my student had got us into a dangerous attitude. Luckily enough, I gained spatial awareness and I understood where we were and we were fine, but that absolutely terrified me. So the takeaways from that: don't fly into clouds and try to just maintain awareness of what the helicopter is doing. Don't be switching in between down, looking at something, and outside, because that switches where things happen. If you lock in outside, you're probably not going to go spatial disorientation in clear conditions because you understand the attitude of the helicopter. But if you're switching in between, that's where problems can happen. And if you have any scary stories in the aircraft, drop them below. I'd love to hear about them. If you like this video, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell indication so you get notified every time I post a new video. And I'll see you guys on the next one.